Hi everyone, so today's video is how to unstick a stuck discussion. So what is it that causes a discussion to go around in circles, and the simple communication practices that anyone can do to help it break out of the circle and become a useful creative interaction. So I'm Alan Sharland, mediator, conflict coach, trainer and consultant in effective communication and conflict resolution. I'm director of Chaos Conflict Management based in London. And I'm the creator of the Communication and Conflict YouTube channel, so you're very welcome if it's your first time of visiting, and welcome back if you've been with me before on these videos. So discussions can become stuck in any context, whether it's in a family gathering, whether it's in a meeting with our partner, with our work colleague, in boardroom meetings, in a community meeting. And there are very common features that arise in any discussion that's become stuck, which I'm going to kind of look at as we go through the video. But quite often there's an absence of a particular couple of communication practices that, when used, actually very quickly and very easily will break most stuck discussions out of their stuckness. And into something that becomes more meaningful and useful for the people involved, and they help such discussions to stop escalating into personal kind of arguments and personal battles, which don't really serve anybody in terms of moving forward on the issue of discussion. So I'm going to use a boardroom as a way of illustrating the problems that can arise and the practices that can help. But what I talk about in the boardroom illustration is just as valid in any situation where there's a discussion going on, even if it's just between two people involved, whereas obviously a boardroom meeting will often be, maybe 10 to 12 different people, or could be up to that kind of figure. So I'm going to introduce that now and illustrate the kinds of things that can easily happen in a difficult discussion that becomes stuck. And then I'll move on to explaining to you why a couple of very simple communication practices can actually completely unlock the stuckness of a difficult discussion. So here we go into the boardroom. So I hope you enjoyed that little example of a boardroom meeting. Obviously it's a compressed version of what would normally happen, but quite often those different responses from different people within the meeting are common features of what can occur in a meeting that becomes stuck. And as I mentioned in the last kind of panel there, and also what I said earlier, you may also see analogies in meetings or discussions that occur in families, in workplaces informally, perhaps not boardroom meetings but just informally, in community meetings as well. And also sometimes just on a smaller scale, just one-to-one interactions, various aspects of what happened in that meeting can also pan out and show up in just two-person meetings as well. So what I'm going to do now is do a little kind of review of what happened and summarize the kinds of comments or behaviors that occur in meetings which almost can't do anything but become stuck because of the things that are said. And then what I want to do is go on to just what is actually almost deceptively simple things that can be done in any such meeting that will significantly help to unlock the purpose of the meeting and lead to something more meaningful and creative. It's just a question of whether anybody in the meeting is willing to actually do it, rather than, in a sense, stay so kind of locked in the circle that it's got stuck in, that in a sense they don't see a way out. But anyway, let's do a little review of what happened in that meeting, and then we'll go on to the communication practices afterwards. So what was the first thing that happened? First thing was that one person said, we need to do X. And that was immediately met by a dismissive comment saying, that's a crazy idea, we need to do Y. So it's inevitable when that kind of interaction happens that it's almost immediately going to get stuck, because neither person is actually exploring or listening to the other person's viewpoint. They're both, in a sense, immediately opposing each other's viewpoint without finding anything more about it, about the other person's view about things. And so it then becomes a personal battle. Instead of a discussion about a topic, it becomes a personal battle because they're both dismissing each other. And then often that will then move on to the other comments, such as commentary about the other person's idea. Are you nuts? That's the last thing we should be doing. I find that offensive, so then people take it very personally, to an extent understandably, but it doesn't actually help to return to an effective discussion about the topic in hand. And so both people lose the opportunity to have their view heard or discussed, whereas the perhaps intention or belief is that by dismissing the other person's view, it means that they're going to get space for their view to be discussed, but it actually doesn't serve that purpose. What it does is it means that nobody ends up discussing either view, because there's not an openness to hearing either person's view, because they're both battling more about personal things. I'm not going to let you stamp on my idea. Well, I'm not going to let you stamp on my idea. And so nothing actually gets discussed. And so you can see pretty immediately why it's already a stuck discussion. And yet these are very common ways of responding in meetings. And often it's not recognised. And so almost from the start in such discussions, as I say, whether it's a family gathering, whether it's a board meeting, whether it's an informal discussion, there's a dismissal of the other person's view rather than an exploration for it. And as I've said in the text on the screen, that's a hint for later, because there's a very simple thing that we can do when we're involved in this kind of discussion that can unstick it if it's got stuck, and prevent it from getting stuck in the first place if we use this communication practice from the start. So what then happened next in the situation? Let's look at that. So the next thing that's happened is something that perhaps any of us might have done in the past when we're in a meeting that feels like it's going nowhere and we're getting a bit fed up and we're a bit bored with the people who seem to be taking up all the space having an argument instead of getting on with things. It's something that all of us are prone to, but it means we become more kind of observers and lookers in on what's going on rather than returning to being participants in the discussion. And so we'll perhaps have a slightly sarcastic comment about what's happening, or we may be expecting somebody else to fix it. when all the time we also have the capacity to practice the very simple communication skill that I'll come to in a minute. Many of you may have been guessing it already, that can actually open up the discussion, that actually can do that just as easily as anybody else can. There's no reason to wait for the chair of the meeting to do it. If it's a boardroom meeting, there's no reason to wait for the senior member of the family to do it. If it's a family gathering, it's something that any of us could do to contribute to helping the discussion to become unstuck. And that's very much possible for any of us. And again, it is one of the reasons why things stay in a circle, because when it's happened, it means that no one has thought of doing this particular communication practice. It means that actually it becomes stuck because either people remain passive in the situation and look in on it and get very fed up, or people are very actively kind of personally battling with each other, and so it's getting stuck from that point of view. And I'll say a little bit more later about how I would normally characterize that, and you've perhaps seen on some of the other videos that I've done how I would describe that as being either competitive or avoiding in our response and our behavior in such meetings. So that's the next thing that happened, and then there was more that happened in the meeting which also didn't help to unstick the discussion. So let's look at that next. So the next thing that happens is that the chair of the meeting wants to come in to try to move the discussion on, perhaps from a feeling of wanting to show that they're in control of the situation, when obviously by doing that they're not really in control. Then they may also feel quite uncomfortable themselves about what they see as a personal battle emerging in the meeting. There could be all sorts of reasons. Sometimes people try to do such things to do what they think is kind of bringing kind of peace to the discussion, when actually what it's doing is it's trying to kind of put a lid on a boiling pot. It doesn't lead to peace because it's suppressing a discussion that people really want to have. And there could be all sorts of reasons why the chair simply suggests moving on to other matters, because a present discussion doesn't seem to be getting anywhere. It's a stuck discussion going round in circles, and kind of lots of spear throwing, as I call it, between the two people, or perhaps more people involved directly, who are kind of wanting to push their own view but perhaps not open to hearing the other person's perspective. So this is quite a common thing to happen. I want to emphasize whenever I talk about these things, in none of the cases am I wanting to criticize the people who do these things. These are very common reactions in difficult meetings, but they just don't really work to help the discussion to become unstuck. But we're all prone to doing any of the things that are coming up in this this video during stuck discussions. And in the case of the chair, they're there with good intentions. They're wanting to try to support the group in moving forward with things, in coming together to deal with things. But when a discussion has become stuck, sometimes the approach of chairs in these situations, or chairman or chairperson as some people might prefer to call them, is not one of actually helping the discussion to move forward, but perhaps just hoping that it will go away, which it's very unlikely to do when people feel very passionate about it. I've done quite a lot of work with boards, groups, community groups, etc., where this kind of thing has happened. And again, what we look at later in terms of communication practices are often the very thing that's absent from those discussions, and they're very simple practices, but I won't keep teasing you about that. We'll get onto those fairly soon. But as you can see, the response to that is almost always a non-acceptance by those who really do want to talk about a discussion to move on, because they feel it's really important. And so there's a kind of unanimous, at least it's one thing they agree about, is that they don't want to move on, but they want to talk about their particular thing again. X or Y in this case, but the issue obviously is whether it's a discussion or whether it's a kind of a diktat that they're trying to put forward, whether they're just wanting to make a speech without engaging with the other person about their point of view. But anyway, that's also a common response in a stuck discussion situation that also doesn't serve the purpose of unsticking it. And then finally, of course, people will sometimes just leave. They'll resign, or they'll storm out, or they'll just stop coming to meetings, etc., etc. And again, this could be true in a boardroom situation, or it could be in a family breakdown situation, or it could be in informal discussions at work or community meetings, where if people just don't find that there's much that gives them a reason to turn up, they'll either stop attending in the first place, or in the middle of some meetings they'll just storm out because they don't see any point to it. And again, none of these things contribute to unsticking a stuck meeting, but they are the consequences of it remaining stuck. And any one of us in any meeting can contribute to it becoming unstuck by using a couple of simple communication practices, which is what we will now go on to. So the simple communication practices that help to unstick a stuck discussion are listening and summarizing, and open questions based on what has been summarized. So considering the boardroom meeting situation that we looked at just now, the following would be the listening and summarizing an open question that would follow from what happened in that meeting, which would help to unstick it. So the summary would be, so you said we need to do X. What is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? Now, you might think, well, is that it? Is that all that's needed? But what I'm going to do is go through all the different people in that meeting who had something to say about what was going on, and I'm going to look at, from all of their perspectives, why it would be useful for each of those people if someone asked this question. And also I'm going to look at, if no one has already asked that question, why, when it comes to them, it would be in their interest to ask that question, and also of course to have done the summary beforehand. And I'll explain to you a little bit more in a bit why it's important that you do both of those things. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look at each person in turn that we looked at before, and why that question would help them in their situation to open up the discussion and to make the meeting more meaningful and useful for them. But also why, if nobody has already done it, why when it comes to them, when it's their opportunity to participate rather than do what they did before, it would be in their interest to summarize that statement and then to ask that question. So the point being that it doesn't matter who in the meeting does this, summarize what's been said and then ask that question, because anybody can contribute in such a way that it unsticks the meeting. So as I say, I'll go through each person in turn and explain why I'm saying what I say, and then hopefully it will be clear why this very, very simple communication practice can help to unstick a stuck discussion. So the first response to "we need to do X" was, "That's a crazy idea, we need to do Y." Now if that person instead of saying that said, "So you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that?" So that immediately means there isn't going to be this entrenched battle starting, because the second person to speak is opening up to hearing what the first person has to say. So there's no battle starting. So even if the other person thinks they need to do, the group needs to do Y instead, there's a listening atmosphere is being created, and it doesn't mean that the person who's asking that question has to give in their point of view, but it means they're more likely to be listened later because they've listened to the first person's point of view in the first place. So asking the question, "So you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that?" doesn't mean to say we're going to agree with the answers to those questions, but we're going to gain a greater level of understanding of the reasons why the person thinks that's the way forward. And as I say, immediately there's not this entrenchment likely to happen, because if someone says that's a crazy idea, most people are likely to, or it's a very likely outcome that the person who starts with the idea that X is the thing that needs to be done, they're going to be very defensive of it straight away. And if that person comes up with an alternative idea, they're more likely to reject that straight away without knowing anything about it. So it already, when that's a crazy idea is stated, it immediately entrenches the stuckness of the discussion. Whereas if you say, so you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? There's an opening up of the discussion. It's not going to get stuck. It's not going to be dismissed before it's even started. So there's already an opening up. So straight away, there's no stuckness being established in the discussion, which the green that's a crazy idea, we need to do Y statement is immediately going to do. And just to kind of follow up on that's a crazy idea, there can be various ways in which that kind of dismissal can happen. It could be you're only saying that because you're middle class. That was something I saw on a tweet this morning, which I was looking at. Someone was saying that the other person's view was just because the original speaker's view was they were middle class, or it's because you're a woman, or because you're a man, or because you're something. So there's kind of ways in which we use dismissive comments that also serve to entrench the discussion so it stays stuck. So that's a crazy idea is a kind of a generic form of that kind of dismissive comment that can be used, and justification which doesn't really form a justification. Say someone's middle class and that's why they hold a certain view. There could be 100,000 different reasons why they hold that view, and to kind of try to decide for someone why they hold a particular view doesn't help either. And again, to summarize, so you said we need to do X. What is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? It doesn't involve any of that. It doesn't give our interpretation of why the person's saying it. It's genuinely listening to their reasons for saying what they say, but not committing us to agreeing with that once we've heard them. But at least we're understanding more about why the person has said what they've said. So that's for that first person, why they would say that. And also it means that the person who spoke originally isn't likely to then respond with, are you nuts? That's the last thing we should be doing. So again, it's further entrenching the discussion and getting nowhere. So that's response number one. Let's move on to the next response, or the next thing that happened in the meeting. Oh no, the egos have landed. So that was the next example of the kind of thing that can happen in meetings that are stuck. Is there's a kind of a standing back from what's going on and a kind of a talking about it rather than becoming involved. Now, if the original question, the summary and then the question had been asked straight away, then this person wouldn't have had to make that kind of comment. And again, I'm not knocking someone who makes this kind of comment. It can be very frustrating sitting in a meeting where people are just not actually moving forward with things, and you can feel quite disengaged. But in this situation, if in the original interaction, the summary and then the question had been asked, this person would have had to come up with this kind of comment, because they would have started to engage in a more productive, expansive, exploratory discussion without it becoming very quickly a personal battle, which is why the guy or woman observing this might have said, the egos have landed, because they would have been observing that that's very much what's going on. It's more about a personal battle than actually discussing the issues. But if they didn't do that, and it did go as previously had happened, where we need to do X and the other person described that's crazy, we need to do Y, there's no reason why the person who said, oh no, the egos have landed, couldn't themselves have said, so you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that, so that they'd have made an active contribution to trying to unstick the discussion to help it to become more expansive again. So again, instead of this comment, a summary and a question of that form would have been another way in which somebody else could have contributed to unsticking the stuck discussion. And of course, it may well have been that they asked that question about why instead, but so long as both people who originally had a view about whether it should be X or it should be Y, so long as both get a chance to expand upon that, then it's making the discussion an open and meaningful and useful and exploratory and expansive discussion, so that everybody attending gets a chance to hear different points of view instead of simply witness a personal battle going on, which is what leads to it becoming stuck. So the next comment is very common to discussions that get stuck, and in the case of boardroom meetings, there's a very common expectation that the person who needs to sort it all out is the chair, and so people will kind of perhaps not even say they think the chair should be doing everything to stop it, or they might say it as a side discussion with somebody else, but ultimately again it doesn't contribute anything to actually unsticking the discussion. Obviously in this case, if somebody had asked done the summary, so you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? If that had been asked earlier in the meeting so far, then this person obviously wouldn't have any need to say this anyway. But if it has still progressed without the summary and the question happening, again, there's no reason why this person who is expecting the chair to sort it out couldn't actually do the summary and ask the question themselves again. There can sometimes be reasons why people tell themselves it's not their place to do it. They may say, well, it's not my job, the chair should be doing it, the chair might feel undermined. They may just have an inhibition themselves about speaking up and doing the summary and asking the question. But the point being that really just saying the chair is doing nothing to stop it doesn't, again, contribute anything to unsticking the discussion. And the risk is then there starts to be blame put on the chair for not solving the problem, rather than there being be a look at the whole group and why no one at any stage is exploring further the particular viewpoints being raised. That's the thing that's been notably absent at every stage in the meeting so far. No one has actually said, so you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? So that there can be an open exploratory curiosity about what people are saying, so that then it becomes a useful, meaningful, interested discussion, and people's personal feelings about the viewpoints being expressed stay out of it, because there's an understanding that everybody is there to try to explore the possible options, the possible viewpoints, and take things forward, rather than immediately dismiss them with the comments that we've looked at previously. So again, this person could summarize and then ask the question, and it's obviously a possibility for them to contribute to unsticking the stuck discussion. And so this next comment, why do we always end up banging on about X or Y? Again, if there's been a kind of an unproductive backwards and forwards, it should be X, no, you're crazy, it should be Y, etc., then it's understandable that people will become frustrated about the discussion. But the thing about summarizing back and then exploring further is that it in a way it stops being about X or Y. It becomes about a much broader range of issues that can be expanded upon and understood and considered. So it's not such a kind of a stuck two-part issue that's being discussed. It's about a whole range of things that underlie X and Y, that gives a chance for there to be a better understanding of the issues involved, and therefore a greater opportunity for things to cross over and come to some kind of consensus or decision or agreement, or just understanding. Even if not agreement, then certainly an understanding of people's different perspectives. So this is quite a common thing to happen when people have got fed up with the meeting, but it's obviously important that X and Y get discussed, but in a way which opens up the debate rather than it simply be an entrenched battle, which is back to Y summarising. So you said we need to do X or Y, depending on which one's being explored. What is it about X or Y that leads you to say we need to do that? And that opens up the discussion, and then it's not just about X or Y, it's about a whole range of other things which are much more interesting and meaningful and useful for people when they have that kind of discussion. And then finally, if it really has got this far without anybody unsticking the discussion, then it can fall to the chair to summarise and then ask the question, instead of doing what the chair in this particular scenario did, which is again quite a common thing to happen, where everything seems to be stuck or difficult, or personal battles are happening and possibly there's a concern about it escalating into something more serious in some way. Sometimes chairpersons, chairman, whatever term you prefer to use, or a senior person in a family, or an older person in a family, or whoever is seen to be the person kind of in charge in some way, simply says let's move on to other matters, rather than actually give voice to the things that people want to say. And a way of opening up that possibility so that there isn't that entrenchment and worry about not being heard is to say, so you said we need to do X. What is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? And it gives that open floor, which is ultimately what a chair is meant to do at a board meeting, to give that open space for a greater discussion about the issue, to be explored, to be heard, and similarly also on option Y as well. If and the point being that if one person is given the option to speak about their point of view, they're much more likely to be open to hearing the other person's point of view. So it allows for a fairness and equity in how much can be discussed about either option. But if the chair does do what happened in that meeting, and it is a common thing to happen in a lot of board meetings, they just say, well, let's put that aside and move on to other matters. It's likely to get that very strong reaction saying, no, I want to talk about this, it's very important. And then if it really does feel like things are being shut down, then people do end up resigning because they just don't see the point of attending if the important issues can't be discussed. And similarly in family gatherings and other meetings, people walk out, people kind of leave simply because the controversial issues are suppressed and not allowed to be expanded upon. And again, a simple way of giving that opportunity to happen, even if what gets said is still quite challenging, it opens up the possibility for there to be a meaningful discussion. And simply to summarise back what the person said they think is important, in this case, so you said we need to do X, what is it about X that leads you to say we need to do that? And it gives that person space to expand upon things so that other people can hear what they feel is important. And it doesn't require them to agree. It just means that they do get a much more informed basis on which to make their assessments about option X. And similarly, when option Y is given the same opportunity, it means everybody is learning a lot more about what's going on. But when things are suppressed, or it just does become a personal battle, and other people just disengage and sit on the side, then the meeting remains stuck and nothing moves forward. And actually everybody is responsible for that. It's not just the chair, but the chair does have that opportunity to do this just as much as anybody else does. So it really is that simple, as a practice for unsticking a stuck discussion. The important thing about the summary is that you use the words or the description that the person refers to. You don't give your interpretation of what they've said. you say, if they say X, and X could be we need to build a new factory, or we need to cut staff in the organisation, or something in a family discussion, we need to move grandma to a new house because she's needing more care, or something like that. Whatever it is, you summarise back in the words that they've used. You don't give your interpretation of it, so you summarise back. So you say we need to do, and then whatever that person said, and then you just ask a question to open up the discussion about it. So what is it that leads you to say that? What are the reasons you feel that's what we need to do? Anything that helps to open up more information about the thing that the person has put forward as an idea. And you do that with any ideas that come up. And the whole point about it is that none of it is entrenching, none of it is attacking. Everything about doing those two things is to open up the discussion, so therefore the discussion doesn't get stuck. The second we start dismissing people's views on whatever basis, before we've explored it, we might dismiss a view once we've explored it, but even to call it dismissal might not be that we've just come to a decision it's not going to work, but to dismiss it by saying it's crazy, it's stupid, all middle class people would say that, or whatever kind of dismissive comment is used, that's always going to cause stuckness because it will turn it into a personal battle. But a summary and then an open question to explore the topic further is always going to mean that people feel like they're involved in a discussion which is going somewhere, which has purpose, which has meaning, which has use to it, that allows for a broad consideration of the issues, rather than just I think this is what we should do, yes or no. And many of you will know times when decisions have been made about things without properly exploring the consequences, the issues, whether it actually fulfills what it's meant to, and then later it has to be stopped because it wasn't a good idea going forward in the first place, because it wasn't given the chance to be explored properly. And that's much more likely in a personal battle situation, because it can be like the person who dominates for whatever reason. They're more senior, they're more forceful in some way, their idea wins, but there hasn't been an exploration of the issues that underlie their idea. So everything about this as a way of moving forward, to summarize what the person said and then ask an exploratory open question about it to hear more about it, will always serve to unstick a stuck discussion. So hope you found that interesting and useful, and that you can apply it in any stuck discussion situations that you're experiencing at the moment, or if any come up in the future, that you can return to this video to remind you of two particularly simple but effective ways of helping to unstick a stuck discussion. Please like the video and share it if you think other people would be interested. Please also subscribe to the channel if you'd like to get notifications of future videos, and also to go and see the other videos that are available, including the one I mentioned in the text about use of open questions. If either of the books look interesting to you, please purchase them on Amazon. So A Guide to Effective Communication for Conflict Resolution, or How to Resolve Bullying in the Workplace, Stepping Out of the Circle of Blame to Create an Effective Outcome for All. And I look forward to seeing you soon, and thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.